So there are a couple of reasons I wanted to do this talk. One is because it's the 10th anniversary of BDD last year. And it's coming up to my 10th anniversary of becoming involved in it. So I wanted to look back and have a bit of a reflection on how it all started and how it's evolved. And it's evolved massively over 10 years. And I think some people have been left behind on that journey. So I wanted to redo that journey and to bring you guys along with me. It's my story, so it's necessarily a little bit self-promoting, but I'm also hoping that it will inspire you, and it will want you guys to get involved in this kind of thing as well, not just BDD, but whatever ideas you come across, other people's ideas, and take them and develop them and come up with your own as well. So it's a journey of somebody who started not a very good dev with 7 years experience. I was lucky enough to have enough of a brain to join ThoughtWorks. And that's pretty much where my career started. So imagine that I've got 7 years of development and I've learned almost nothing. I do not even own the Gang of Four Patterns book, right? That's how bad I am as a dev. I read refactoring or bits of refactoring while waiting for my interview at ThoughtWorks, okay? The story does actually start a little bit before I joined ThoughtWorks. So, I have to make apologies to Chris and Dan, who are two of my very good friends, Chris Metz and Dan North. And Dan came up with BDD. Chris was very heavily involved, particularly in the early days. I also have shame too. So these guys have been doing it wrong. I've been doing it wrong. I also need to apologise to Dave Kalinski because he's got one slide in here where he did it wrong. And we've been doing it wrong for a very long time. And we've been telling everybody else how to do it, and we've been telling people wrong. So this is the evolution to something that's much, much better. So the second half of this talk, I'm going to show you what better looks like. Okay, so part one, first 40 minutes. This is what we did. 2003, that's such a long time ago. So BDD was something that Dan came up with, and he did it because he was trying to explain test-driven development to people and kept finding the word test got in the way. So BDD back in 2003 was essentially ATDD or TDD without the word test. And he had this little experiment he was doing where he took test in JUnit and he was replacing it with a framework that said should instead, right? So it just, you know how JUnit started with the word test? 3 point something or other. Now it's got annotations, but back in the day it started with the word test. He said start it with the word should. This class should do some stuff. So JBehave took something like test database and forced you to clarify what that meant. This class should save customer details. Now that's one of the 4 methods I've come across called test database. And they all did very, very different things. So this was really useful for getting people to describe what their code should do. That was how JBehave started. Unit level, class level, really simple. 2004. So Dan sat on this for about a year. Rachel said she heard him talking about it in 2003. I wasn't around. Chris Metz came along. He's an analyst. And Dan was trying to explain mock objects to Chris, who is not a dev, right? So Chris is looking at this and going, oh, so when you describe the behavior of this thing should do this stuff and should have this outcome, it only has it in this particular context. It should say, should save customer details to the database when they're valid. You know, that's the kind of thing it should say. And anyone who knows my take on BDD will know that I bang on about conversations quite a lot and how important it is to have a conversation. And if you were in the room 5 minutes ago, you would have heard me saying that. Okay? The should really refers to a conversation. Unfortunately, and this is straight from Chris's blog, this is what Chris reckons should have the conversation. Given this context provided by Module, the class, system, or component should have the following conversation. So this is a business house. As soon as you give code to anyone, even Chris Metz, people seem to forget that it's people who have conversations. And he's talking about pretend you're the code and pretend you're having a conversation about what you should do with another class. So we're thinking about responsibility principles and things like that. But still, Chris, okay, so this is wrong. People have conversations, okay? not code. But it does introduce the template, and this is a template that most of you who've done BDD will be familiar with. Hands up if you do some BDD. Have heard of BDD? Hands down if you've never heard of BDD before. Hands up, sorry, if you've never heard of BDD before. Careful when specifying behaviour. Okay. So I am going to introduce BDD. We're going to get more into the details of it in the second half. But just to share with you my take on BDD, here's an example of an example. Given Fred's bought a microwave costs £100. When we refund the microwave, Fred should be refunded £100. Really simple example, right? The thing about these examples is they're not generic. There is a specific guy who's buying a specific object for a specific price. And because of that, we can start thinking of other scenarios where something different might happen. So what might happen when Fred brings the microwave back? What happens?
They don't give him a refund.
Why don't they give him a refund?
It's broken.
Because it's broken, because he broke it, right? He dropped it on the floor and smashed the front. Nice one. Okay, so that's a good example. Here's another one. Given baby rabbits cost £10, when we sell Snowy the baby rabbit, the customer should be charged £10. Hands up if you've got an image of a little baby rabbit in your head. Little white baby rabbit, isn't it cute? Okay, so these things are very good for exciting the imagination and getting people to think and to explore. I did a talk called When Outcomes Don't Come Out. It's still available on the Skills Matter site. And one of the things I said, so this was when I was starting to learn about Cynefin, which is a sense-making framework for understanding uncertainty. And I realized that all the value is in things which are new and have never been done before. And usually, if you talk to the business, they don't know what the outcomes of some scenarios will be. And what was happening was people were pushing back on that. And I said, if you ever find that, if you ever find the business have uncertainty about scenarios, jump on it. Because that's your risk. That's the area of higher discovery. Make something, get it out there. Try and get some feedback on some stuff. Don't sit there trying to thrash out analysis when you can't. Somebody who was in the audience, a friend overheard them talking and reported this to me. They said that I had set the industry back 7 years with this talk because I had taken away the illusion of certainty that we'd given people with BDD. We'd given them this lovely illusion that you could specify everything with scenarios, everything, 4-hour-long planning meetings, right? And now I had taken that away. And that makes a lot of devs really uncomfortable because if you can't be told exactly what to do, how do you behave? More on that when I talk in the second half. So this is Cynefin. I will be covering this in some detail. Just to let you know, we have emergent outcomes here. So these outcomes are emergent on this side, uncertainty. And over this side, you have experts involved. And BDD works really well in the bit in between. And I'll be talking more about that as well. 2013. So this is last year. This is now, we're moving into the 10th anniversary of BDD. It's only just gone. Last year, finally Dan tells me there's no such thing as declarative and imperative. So this is a thing we keep talking about, how you talk about scenarios in terms of a higher level of abstraction than the UI. Don't get bogged down in button presses and text box entries. Talk about it in terms of what you're achieving, what capability you're providing somebody. And Dan pointed out that there's no such thing. So we do talk at a very low level when we're dealing with code, and then we talk at a higher level when we're dealing with business analysts, and then we talk at a higher level when we're dealing with domain experts, and a higher level beyond that when we're talking with peripheral stakeholders, until you get to the point where you're trying to make a company some money. And that is a higher level of abstraction still. And then you've got one where you're doing good for society and creating jobs and stuff like that. So there's all kinds of levels of abstraction in which you can talk about the work you're doing. I went, oh yeah. But it's taken me till last year to realize that. So I thought I would let you know I'm still learning. I also created a blog post called Capability-Based Planning. So this is about the capabilities you're giving somebody. Now BDD is phrased in terms of capabilities if you do it right. You know, the ability to tell somebody they need an umbrella because it's going to rain, for instance. But this is from the blog. If in doubt, try to get something live early because there's nothing like being wrong to find people who will tell you what right looks like. And I share this with you now because I'm still finding that some of the things I'm doing are wrong. So please come and tell me what right looks like. Preferably stay for the second half if you're going to do that. 2014. 2014 has already been quite exciting for me. I wrote 2 new blog posts, BDD for legacy systems, and continuous discrete capabilities, which is basically about non-functionals, and BDD for ops and monitoring. So these are things I should have written ages ago, and I finally got around to doing last month. And we've defined BDD again. It's writing software that matters. If you find you're not writing software that matters, either BDD is wrong or you're doing it wrong, and I'm going to suspect the second, but it's okay. We always do it wrong, and we've been doing it wrong for 10 years. And this is the most wrong thing in BDD. Dan North said it was just a thought experiment. He never expected anybody to actually make it work. Thank you very much. All right, part 2. So in the first half of this talk, I talked about what we did wrong for the last 10 years and some of the things that we discovered in those last 10 years. Part 2 is going to be about what we should have been doing instead. And there are implications not just for BDD, but for software development generally. A lot of people find this one a bit mind-melting, particularly Knevin. So please do feel free to grab me and ask questions. I'm going to be hanging around for a speakers after party or whatever it is that's happening tonight. And I don't mind if you want to come talk. Okay. I just want to start with a little bit of a story. My project manager, we started basically with the new stuff that we didn't really know how to do on this project, and the estimates were all over the shop. Blah, 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 blah. And she went a bit mental over that, and then things started to stabilize, and we started doing stuff more regularly, and the Scrum estimates and velocity started falling into line. That was great. And then, very close to the deadline, this requirement came out of nowhere, and it was something we'd tried to analyze, and we hadn't foreseen it. And it was because we hadn't put this application in front of the right people. And when we did put it in front of them, we got this sudden feedback of this is wrong. And it's basically, we had assumed defaults for this particular form and checked them and checked that they were right. And then they said, no, we don't want any defaults at all. And there was one particular Boolean, which was purchase or sale. So it's a trade. Is it a purchase or a sale? And it was a Boolean throughout the entire flipping code base. And now we needed to make it this option thing in Scala, but we had a .NET front end. So it was just a nightmare to unpick this thing through the code base. It took us ages to do it properly. And she said, right, we need more analysis. That was her response. She said, we need more analysis. I said, please don't. Because the thing is, we did the analysis, and we didn't find this out. No amount of thrashing would have found that out. All it would have done was make people invest more in the analysis, which meant that when we did discover stuff, then they would be even more upset and figure that they needed even more analysis, which would cause discoveries to be even more expensive. Then you need more analysis, and before you know it, you're waterfall. That's why waterfall fails, because it doesn't take into account the fact that you discover stuff. So, I wanted to start by introducing the framework I use to talk about discovery and uncertainty. Now, I used to do the whole BDD talk and show BDD to people. And what I've realized is if you start with this, BDD makes so much more sense, and you understand where and why it's broken very instinctively. I told you BDD was all wrong, right? We've been using it all wrong for years. Years. Okay, the most difficult thing about Knevin is how to pronounce it. It's pronounced Knevin. It's spelt Sinophin. It's a Welsh word. It was created by a guy called David Snowden, who works for a company called Cognitive Edge. Hands up if you've heard of Knevin. Hands up if you wouldn't have heard of it if you hadn't seen it written down. Yep, okay. So a few people think that, I say Cynefin and everybody's like, oh, never heard of that. You see it written down and they're like, oh, that's Cynefin. Right, okay. So there's a book I absolutely love, tiny little book, Tom DeMarco and Timothy Lister's Waltzing with Bears, and it starts on chapter 1. If a project has no risks, don't do it. And the reason is, if you are doing a project with no risks, it is the same project that you did last time, with the same people, the same technology, the same requirements, just again. And nobody ever does that, right? If we did that, it would be a production line. It would be churning out the same car over and over again. Every single software development project, and most projects that we do, have something new about them. And that something new is risky. So I'm talking to David Anderson about this. David said something very profound. We were looking at Mary Poppendike's take on lean software development and eliminating waste, eliminating anything which doesn't lead to the end product. And he said, well, a stand-up's waste. If not, then do them for an hour. If they are, stop doing them. Why would you not do them for an hour if they're not wasteful? And I went, oh my God, yeah, but what? And this was around the time we were looking at learning as a constraint. And I realized that that was the case, that stand-ups are there because they allow you to learn. So the thing you need to learn most about, this new thing, it's where the value is in the project, is where this new thing happens. So imagine that I am producing the world's first camera phone. Okay, this is the first phone with a camera on. It's a lot bigger than this. The camera is new. And when Kyocera did their first camera phone, they pointed it towards the users because they're going to make video calls with it. That's what they thought people would use it for. They didn't know about selfies and duck faces and things like that, right? They discovered that later. So that was a difference. Hands up if you've got a camera on your phone. Hands up if you don't have a camera on your phone. Right, not one hand. I've had one person put one hand up, like very proud hipster, retro geek, right? Everybody's got a camera on their phone. So what happened is Nokia got hold of it and they spoilt the differentiator. They popularized the camera on the phone so much that now, if you have a phone, it pretty much has a camera on. In fact, getting hold of a phone without a camera on, if you're working in, say, a defense establishment and you're not allowed to bring cameras in, can be tricky. It can be really hard. So having a phone without a camera on is now a differentiator. That's how much it's been spoiled. So let's say this is the first ever camera phone. It's got a camera on it. What else does a phone need to be able to do apart from take pictures or make videos? Make a phone call. Thank you very much. Anything else? Receive a phone call. Look up numbers. Check your answer phone messages. These are things that we expect our phones to have. And David calls these table stakes. They are commodities. They are the things you need just to be able to play the game. Okay, that's table stakes in poker. You need to have them just to play the game. Anything additionally you have is differentiating, it's new. Okay, so now I've talked to you in terms of an example. We've also got expedited stuff. So if it's software, can you think of an example of an expedited bug in software?
Losing £170,000 a second.
£70,000 a second loss. Right, absolutely. Night trading, end of 2012, managed to release something to production that activated another piece of code they weren't expecting that was doubling their trades, I believe. So every time they were making a trade, they were only hedging half of it. They lost 13 billion before they got it sorted out. 13 billion. It's almost as much as Bitcoin. Right. Carters are the other one. So carters are the other type of software I look at. And carters are very, very simple, very predictable exercises. Things like turning numbers into Roman numerals. Kids can do them. I remember programming when I was a kid. You guess a number between 1 and 100 and it tells you higher or lower. You know, do you remember programming things like that, right? So children can program those kind of games. We frequently use them as safety nets to learn something else, something that's a bit newer. So we might learn TDD with them or learn a new language with them or something like that. Because it takes out some of the complexity. Okay, so this is the innovation cycle. We have a differentiator which is really innovative. We spoil it, and then we get commodities as a result, right? The camera, on the camera phone. Devs, hands up devs. This is Nord DevCon. I'm expecting a lot of you. Fantastic. What do you do if you have to do the same boring thing over and over and over and over again?
Automate it.
Sorry?
Automate
Automate it, absolutely. We automate it, right? Because we hate that. It's boring. Or we'll make a library out of it. We'll make open source. But we'll basically turn it into something that's reusable and repeatable because we don't want to have to deal with that again, which turns it into a differentiating problem. So now you've got a differentiating piece of software that's the new library. Okay, so that's the innovation cycle. Now I'm going to show you how this relates to Cynefin. And this is really exciting for me because this is not just applicable to software and hardware. This is applicable to your life. We have simple problems. Simple problems are ones children can solve. And what we do with these problems is we categorize them. We go, oh, it's one of those problems. So your chain falls off your bicycle, you put it back on again. And there's usually one best way of putting the chain back on the bicycle, right? You ever remember those wooden jigsaw puzzles you always get as a kid? And there's really not much. Every piece, you just put it in place. There's only really one way to do the jigsaw. You pick up a piece, you put it in place. You pick up a piece, you put it in place. And you're working out how to do it. And there's a practice for doing that with really simple jigsaws. Anybody do 1,000-piece jigsaws? Yeah? One person, is it Jan? Yeah. So 1,000-piece jigsaws. Anyone know the strategies for doing jigsaws? Really big jigsaws? Start with the edges, right? You start with the edges. That's one way of doing it. If you've got lots of people working on it, you might decide to start with a particular color or to start with a particular character that you can see on the box. So there are multiple ways of doing it. And that's because it's more complicated. And a complicated problem requires some expertise to solve, and you can analyze it, and it usually has several good practices associated with it. So my favorite example of a complicated problem is a watch. You can take a watch apart, you can put it back together, it has a very predictable outcome. If it doesn't keep time, it's not a good watch. Okay? Really predictable outcome. A bicycle, you can take a bicycle apart, put it back together again. Anybody heard of frog versus bicycle thinking? So you can take the bicycle apart and put it back together. You can't do that with a frog, right? Frogs don't like it very much. Okay, a frog is what we call complex. So a complex system or a complex problem is one where the properties are emergent as a result of its parts. So they are not merely putting the parts together for a predictable outcome. Something happens as a result. The duck face, right? If any of you ever played with some of the new websites come out, Reddit, Twitter, who could have predicted hashtags? Twitter's amazing. All of these new things that have emergent properties associated with them. And because you couldn't predict them, frequently you'll find that the business can't predict them either. And the business won't know what the outcome of the scenario might be. Chaos is the fourth domain. These are domains, by the way, not quadrants. It's not a matrix. They're fuzzy-edged. Things move around, as you saw with the innovation cycle. Chaos is really short-lived. So chaos is accident and emergency in your house burning down. And it will usually resolve itself, and it will not always resolve itself in your favor. Now, in a complex domain where you have these emergent outcomes, the idea is to try something that's safe to fail, to experiment. They call it to probe. But in chaos, you have to act. You get out the house. You throw a blanket over the fire. Do whatever you need to constrain the problem. And then take a little bit of a step back and look at it and go, am I safe? If not, get somewhere safe, right? And we drill so that we don't have to think about it, so that we're not trying to make decisions. We just know what to do. Ron Jeffries, on my Cynefin for Devs blog, wrote, is it wise to do something that's not safe to fail, even in chaos? I said, well, if you don't get out the house, you're going to burn to death, but it doesn't stop you trying to get out the house, right? You've got to try. It may not be safe to fail. Hope you don't fail. And there are aspects of this domain which really are wing and a prayer. There is a fifth domain, disorder. And disorder is a state of not knowing which of these domains dominate. Now, I can give you a really, really simple example of this. We tend to act according to our preferred domain. Where do you think estimates work best? Over this way or over this way? Lean in the direction you think estimates work best. Yeah. Right, okay. Estimates work when things are predictable, and we've done them before, and we know how long they're going to take. If it's new and you've never done it before, you have no idea what's going to happen. And yet, most of our Scrum projects, we estimate in story points. Most of our lean projects, we use cycle time, even though we've never done it before, you know. So there's some lovely, lovely metrics that Larry Macarone produced that really illustrate this point. He works for Rally, and they've got all of Rally's project data. And it turns out that even real project data does not follow a normal distribution. It has no way of being predictable. The only thing you can do with this is Monte Carlo simulations, which is what some of the new Kanban tools are actually putting in place. So you can't predict real projects at all. I'll show you what you need to do instead. There's this little cliff edge here. See this little cliff? That's because along the border from simplicity to chaos, we have complacency. And when you get complacent, you tip into chaos. It's really hard to get back the other way. Really hard. Now, I know Dom is going to be referencing the chaotic domain in his talk, so I should probably mention it is possible to exploit chaos if you're clever. If you have that sense of urgency and you can galvanize people to act, you can actually exploit it. There was a really lovely example from The Guardian. The Telegraph were producing all of the MPs' expenses reports. They'd had reporters working on it for months before they started revealing this stuff. So every day there's a new horrific revelation about how the people in charge of our country are abusing our money. Okay? And The Guardian really wanted to catch up on this. So what they did was they reached out to their fan base, all the Guardian readers, who'd never ever touched the mail, might read the Telegraph, so they're losing some people to the Telegraph. But they reached out to them and they said, well, look, give us a hand to catch up. Here's all the documents, read them, tell us whether there's anything interesting in them. Tell us whether it's boring, tell us whether it's really interesting, we definitely need to look. Tell us whether it's something that might be interesting. Okay? So because of that, they were able to catch up very, very quickly, and they had a meter that was going that showed you how many documents the fan base had left to get through. And that was how they exploited that sense of urgency. So I use this estimate of complexity, and this is a really objective way to just get people to on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 to 5 is easy because you can use your hand in meetings to do it. And you can go, what do you think, guys? Is this a 1 to a 5? Is this a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? And this is the scale I use. Nobody in the world has ever done it before. It's completely new. It's a 5. Okay? Somebody has done it before, but it wasn't in this organization, which means you have no idea how long it took them, who came out the woodwork, what regulators, what other stakeholders tried to stop you, who got fired because they took too long and went over the budget, etc. You don't know what they discovered. So it's reasonably new. You know it can be done, and that's pretty much all you know about it. And remember, this is a continuum. I don't get people to vote 3.5s or anything like that, but things can be more complex or more complicated. A 3 means somebody in the company's done it before. A 2 means somebody in the team has done it before, and a 1 means we all know how to do it. Okay. So that's just a really simple scale for estimating the kind of problem you're looking at. Here's how it kind of maps to the Kinevin graph. Notice I haven't put anything in this chaos space. Honestly, if you're having a meeting to analyze how complex the problem is and how emergent the outcome is, and you're in chaos, you're doing it wrong. Okay, don't do that in chaos. Here's some examples. Self-driving cars, manned missions, the Apple fan base, more fan bases, mending watches, SAP, GPS, user registration, right? Boring. Dates, unless you're in the energy business, in which case it turns out, that dates can be really complicated because sometimes days have 25 hours or 23. And sometimes you might be buying energy off of France, in which case, what date is it? You know, we're buying energy from France and we're in the UK. And then you've got the chaos space, which is any kind of production bug that people have dropped things for. I really hate the chaotic space. I once brought down the Guardian travel site for 3 hours. It was my fault. I'm sorry. Okay, so I showed you the template that we use for BDD. That should word that I keep putting in italics is so important because it does allow us to question. And when we're in that uncertain space, we might not know. That's why it's important. It's why it's important to have these conversations. It's why I don't use the word specification, because we might not know what the thing ought to do. If you're in that position, rather than analysing it, which only works for complicated stuff, try something else and get feedback. This is what Lean Startup does. Right? Most startups do not spend their time writing BDD scenarios. They get something out and get feedback from it. Back in the day of waterfall, this is what we used to do. We used to make sure we got it right. I once worked on a project which had a full year of analysis before the devs were allowed anywhere near it. And then it had a year of high-level design from the senior devs. And then a year of code, and then I joined, and I was on it for 3 years. And it made it to litigation. It made it to court. But I don't think it made it to production. It was millions and millions of pounds spent on that thing, you know? If we can't get it right with a year of worth of analysis, and now we're agile, which means we didn't spend that year worth of analysis, we have to make a different assumption. We have to assume that we got it wrong. So I'm not just showing you how we did BDD all wrong for 10 years, I'm showing you how you do BDD with the assumption that you get it all wrong as well, okay? I use 2 patterns which really help me to question scenarios. One I call context questioning. Is there a context in which this event will create a different outcome? So you've seen the cash machine, right? I talked about the cash machine. I asked for £20, it should give me £20. There's a pixie inside that's giving me the £20. Is there a context in which I do not get £20? When I haven't got £20 in my bank account, then it shouldn't give me £20. Is there a context in which I can have no money in my bank account and it would still give me £20? When I've got an overdraft, right, and that's how we discover scope creep, okay? By just making these questioning patterns. It's an interesting thing. If I didn't have any cash machines at all, would it be useful to ship a cash machine without an overdraft facility? Yeah, because it reduces the queues in the bank. So that's a useful thing to do. Is it useful to ship a cash machine which doesn't debit the account? You could get...
Put money in. If there was a fast deposit machine there, it would still be a cash
You could
machine.
put a deposit machine, so you can have a machine which accepts deposits. Absolutely, you could do that.
For the user.
Sorry?
Be useful for the user.
Be useful for the user until the bank runs out of money, which will be fine because then the government will bail you out, no problem. Okay? So basically, look out for the transactions. Look out for when there's 2 stakeholders and they both need to have something which goes both ways. That's a very frequent situation where you cannot split the outcomes. Something where you can ship something independently, split the scenario, split the outcomes. Outcome questioning, so this is context questioning, given Fred bought a microwave, and the microwave's on discount, right? So he only gets 90 quid back. Really simple. Is this the only outcome that matters? This is outcome questioning. If we could achieve it with pixies, get the devs' heads out the code, would it be enough? So we said earlier, is there any other outcome that matters? You've got to debit the account. Maybe we put an item back into stock. Okay, so Fred brings back the microwave. It's not faulty, he didn't drop it on the floor. It's just the wrong color. We find the right color box and then we put it back into stock. No problem. And you can keep going. If it is faulty and it's not Fred's fault, we print a fault ticket. Right. So that was 25 minutes. And that is my introduction to BDD. Now you guys know just about everything about basic BDD as I do, including Kinevin, which I'm really excited by. If you hire me to train your company, I will take a full day to do that and charge a lot of money for it. Right. But you get lots of exercises and lots of your own domain and stuff like that. But you can do it in 25 minutes. Right, feature injection. So remember I mentioned feature injection in the first half. And this is basically about not doing anything unless you absolutely need to. It has some fairly serious implications for BDD because you can get people to talk about scenarios they care about. What we start by doing is by identifying a vision, and the vision has to be something which makes money, saves money, or protects existing revenue. And that can mean stopping your customers going to somebody else, a competitor. So maybe you're spoiling their differentiator. It can mean giving yourself options for the future, so maybe replacing a legacy code base to make it easier to change, so you're protecting yourself for the future. Sometimes it can be really hard to work out what the ROI is on something which is protecting. As well as this primary or champion stakeholder who's come up with this vision and is championing it, is fighting for the budget. They are the product owner, by the way. Nobody else. Everybody else is just a proxy. You also have these stakeholders whose goals are needed to go live. Okay? So let's say there's a guy who's in charge of the banks, works out that it would be good if we had machines. You also need to take the user's needs into account. You need to take the bank account, the account's needs into account, right? So those are two stakeholders. Sometimes the legacy system can be a stakeholder. You need to do things because, you've still got to talk to your legacy system. Sometimes time ends up being a stakeholder when we wait for 10 minutes, when 10 minutes passes. So look out for the stakeholders when you're doing these scenarios. Legal, architecture, security. These are all people we frequently treat as gatekeeping stakeholders. So they stop us going live unless we meet their needs. If you're working on that scale of complexity and you find one that's a 5 or a 4, so you're doing something for somebody who's a stakeholder in the company, and it's the differentiating thing for that project, please go and have a conversation with them. I was talking to a lady who said, well, we're just replacing an interface between these three systems. We know exactly what it should do. I said, oh, okay, so why are you replacing it? She said, well, we've got this system from somebody else, but it's an absolute nightmare to configure every time we upgrade, and the deployment costs of upgrading are huge. And we want to have control over it ourselves. I said, so you're reducing your deployment and hardware costs? She said, yes. I said, who is the stakeholder who cares about that? I guess it's the ops team. I said, great, have you had a conversation with the ops team? No, hadn't thought about it, right? Poor ops. Everybody leaves them out. Anybody ops here? Anybody DevOps? Does both? Yeah, a couple of people? A few people. Okay. So that's how you include people like ops. And if it's new or it requires expertise, it's perfectly positioned for you to start having those conversations. So, in order to deliver people's goals, we deliver capabilities. I always think of a capability these days as being something of an experiment. We are going to see if we can make more money for this person, get more ad revenue by doing this thing. And if we could achieve it with pixies, we would do that thing with pixies, right? But it's more experimental than somebody's goals. People's goals rarely change at all, ever, for their role, and the capabilities rarely change for a particular project. That's what I found. And this is the point at which we get business analysts involved. And a business analyst is somebody who can analyze that aspect of the business. It's a role here, not a title, okay? Then we get features, and feature is something that you can actually use. It's the way in which you are going to deliver that capability. And we start getting UI designers and UX people involved. And then we have stories. Now, a story is just a slice through a piece of code, slice through a feature, because we can't flip and get feedback on it fast enough otherwise. That's all it is. And the teams that focus on getting that feedback, I find, are way more successful than the ones who focus on getting accurate estimates and velocity measurements, which I've already shown you can't get, not for the most important stuff. And then we have scenarios, which we can use to split up our features and work out what we can and can't ship and get our MVPs. And this is the point, I really love scenarios because it's the point at which everybody can get on board and you've got these concrete examples of what it is you're going to produce. And then you code and you turn your ideas into reality with the help of the ops team. So the person who really knows what's going on tends to be the one who has to actually turn the thing into code. And devs are very, very good at spotting scenarios once they actually start working on something. Otherwise, testers are really, really good at spotting. Testers stay in the problem space for a lot longer. But this is what feature injection looks like. Vision, goal, capability, feature, story, scenario, code. It's not the way Chris Matz explains it anymore. He talks more in terms of that differentiating value and hunting down that differentiating value. But this is how he explained it to me, and I still find it really useful, particularly the capabilities stuff. I've done a lot of blogging recently on how to measure those capabilities, how to split a project up with capabilities, and how to address it. Risky stuff first. So if you want to go at it, I've written the full process, which I've now used in several companies. Split your product into the capabilities you're providing. Impact mapping is very strongly related. Get hold of Goiko's impact mapping book. Estimate the complexity. Have you done it before? Do you need an expert? And then pick off the 5s and 4s. And if you haven't got a 5 or a 4, a thing that you've never done in that organization, you do, you're just missing it. Or somebody's trying to use up their budget so they can get it again next year. Okay. Here's how I do that questioning at a higher level. Context questioning. Is there a stakeholder for whom this application will not meet their goal? Is there a context in which going live will still not achieve the making money, saving money, or protecting money that we were looking for? Are all of the stakeholders' goals met by what we're delivering? If we could deliver it with pixies and we didn't have to write any code, would it be enough? What other outcome at that high level do we need? So BDD is truly multi-scale now. The reason I mention testers is because traditionally, when we give, with devs, right, we go away, we code something, and when we give it to the testers are beautiful, beautiful people who just go, that's fantastic, yeah, let's put it in production. Testers in the room? Devs in the room? Right, good, we outnumber them. Okay, testers are nothing like that. You know this, right? Testers are evil. They're absolutely evil. Do you remember when you were at kindergarten and you used to take home those pictures and show them to your parents and your parents go, oh, that's beautiful, they'd stick them up on the fridge, right? You give your lovely, carefully crafted code to a tester and they tear it into tiny little pieces and give it back to you. Evil people. They have what we call deliberate discovery skills. The skills to deliberately discover what's wrong with your code. And when they discover what's wrong with the code, it results in rework, otherwise known as bugs. The thing that's most evil about testers is they already know how they're going to break your code before you give it to them. They could tell you first. So that's what we do at BDD. We put the testers with their deliberate discovery skills in the conversation first because they think of the scenarios that we miss. They're very, very problem-focused people. Somebody called them what about people. What about this scenario? What about this? What about this? What about this? And that's incredibly valuable and also incredibly evil. And it results in less rework. Why does it result in less rework? Because you don't know what you don't know, and some things you discover after implementation. It's that simple. You will always have to rework some of your app. Otherwise, it wasn't an app worth writing. And if you're doing some toy carter, that's fair enough. If you're doing user registration, again, I would encourage you to go look for a library, you know. But this is what we call the 3 amigos, or the huddle. These 3 roles, somebody who can analyze that aspect of the business, the expert, the developer, and the tester. And we get them all together. Okay, how do we do this remotely? Where do you think it's most effective to offshore problems? Lean, which way you think it is? Differentiating problems that are really new and you need fast feedback? Complicated and simple, predictable problems? Yeah, all over this way. Good, I'm glad to see that. Okay, so that's how you do it, right? Offshore the work that's less complicated. If you're going to offshore anything. Offshore user registration, because it's user registration, again. So analysis and breaking things down into small pieces works really, really well in this commoditized, complicated space. Whereas probing, trying something out, spiking, prototyping, and getting feedback works really, really well in this space here. And BDD works really well in between. Now, if you use BDD for the whole lot, what do you think is going to happen over here? Well, I already said, right, people can't come out with the outcomes. Sometimes you find people go, oh, I hadn't thought of that, and they don't know. If you use BDD over here, what do you think is going to happen? Talking through the user registration scenarios, the login scenarios. Okay? What you can do is, you can do BDD anyway, but look out for that. Look out for people arguing because it's unknown and they're trying to thrash out the scenarios and they can't decide. And go, well, guys, this sounds like it's new. It sounds like you've never done it before. Can we try something out? Look out for people getting really bored and yawning and go, okay, well, look, is it just the case that this is really well understood and we don't need to talk through it because it's just user registration again? Okay? BDD works as a sense-making tool, same as Cynefin. So you can do it either way. You can use the complexity estimation and predict where that's going to happen, but you can also use BDD to find the edges of that, to find where it's useful to have conversations and where conversations are not needed. I have seen a team reduce their planning meetings from 4 hours to half an hour with this process. Half an hour, because they can now agree where the uncertainty is and where the certainty, the high certainty is, and they don't really need to worry about it. So I said breaking things down works really, really well in the commoditized space, and then I showed you this representation of a project, which is all lovely and fractal and everything's broken down. Of course, if it was a real project, it doesn't look anything like this. We don't have a real project and go down the pub and go, oh, that one went so beautifully and it came in on time under budget and just no surprises whatsoever. Of course not. We go down to the pub and we bitch about all the things that went wrong, all the discoveries we made. Here's what a real project looks like. Oops, forgot a bit. We didn't know about that bit. And it turns out that these guys here are all connected, and we didn't know, and we don't need that. And Dan North calls these oh crap moments. Right? This is what a real project looks like. It is completely, mostly made up of those discoveries. That high learning. That's what a project looks like. The Agile Manifesto says we're discovering how to deliver software by doing it and helping others do it. My mum was shipping software on punch cards back in the 60s and 70s, right? We've been doing software and delivering software successfully for years before we did Agile. I don't believe this is Agile's differentiator. We are learning how to discover stuff by doing it and helping other people do it. And if we focus on this, we do go faster. The different levels of granularity are there in order to help you get feedback and work out who to get feedback from and at what level of abstraction. So real option says make as small a commitment as possible before you make a decision. Make a small commitment and then get feedback. It's really important. And now you can start to see why we need those conversations, because those conversations form the earliest point at which we can get feedback on ideas. If you approach a project and you do the risky stuff first, find the riskiest goal, the riskiest stakeholder, the one you've never made happy before, the person who doesn't sleep well at night, and then look at what you need to deliver to them in order for them to sleep soundly at night. Decide how you might deliver it, preferably several experiments, concurrent set-based engineering, if you've got the bandwidth. Get feedback. Actually implement it. Okay? If you do that, you will go faster. So here's an example of a project we actually did this on. This was a big German energy trader. Whenever I spoke to them about the project, they would always start by drawing 3 main architectural components. I put 3 pieces of paper on the wall. I said, put up the capabilities that this system is delivering. It was about 30 cards for this year-long project. The trader had some difficulty working out what we meant, so the business analyst and I did it, and we did it wrong, and that got him involved. It's nothing like being publicly wrong. He also got used to the idea that these were bits of paper and you could tear them up and put different ones up. We did make discoveries about things that were forgotten, but they weren't the differentiating stuff. He really knew what the differentiating capabilities were. There was some stuff around, oh yeah, we need to integrate that bit with that bit. Those were known risks. What we were looking at was the unknown risks, and they're always with the newest stuff. So then when the devs came to actually take this, the analysts would take it, they would break it down into stories, and then those stories would start playing into the dev stream, or they'd break it into features, and then the devs would break it into stories, in fact, because they were just trying to get it so they could get feedback. We estimated the very high-level requirements, these capabilities. We said, well, look, which is the smallest? Call it 20. Which is the biggest? Call it 400. It's 20 times bigger, right? So one in the middle that's about 200. Great, rank the rest. And I said, double anything which you've never done before, or tell me otherwise. Tell me why it shouldn't be doubled, because sometimes you find there's just a little piece that's new. And they couldn't come up with that. So this was a massive project, right? So I couldn't persuade them to try releasing something smaller. So they had a lot of red dots, and those were on the new things, and they addressed those first. And the PMO office guy came over to see what we were up to. He was so impressed, he sat with us instead of with the PMO team. So he was really happy with the governance we had put. No estimates every week, no velocity measurements every week. We were literally getting our estimates and velocity from these high-level measurements. Some of the teams who have adopted that approach, that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 approach, don't even bother with estimating anymore. I am so happy. Right, here's what you do when you don't do the risk first. You have this lovely cone of uncertainty, and you get to the end, and you can see the cone of uncertainty reducing, and of course you've pushed back on all the things that you couldn't analyze, which means that you've eliminated that uncertainty, you're certain about everything, and then the project, oh, no, wait, you discover everything at the end, okay? Because you've pushed back on that uncertainty. That is not what your cone of uncertainty actually looks like, of course. Your cone of uncertainty is a lot higher than that, you just don't know it. And when you get to the end of the project, the cone of uncertainty rapidly drops as your project is cancelled. Deliberate discovery, which is Daniel's thing that he uses quite a lot. Assume ignorance, assume that there's stuff you don't know about. Assume that there is second-order ignorance. You don't know that you don't know. It's going to be in the new stuff. And then optimize for discovery. Do the new stuff first. I already talked about the theory of constraints. The thought experiment is, imagine a large project that you were on. Think about how, if you did it again, with the same people, same technology, same requirements, just again, how much quicker do you think you could do it? I got it from a guy called Ashley James via Cesar Drovo. I target learning. So here is the stand-up template I teach to people. This is what I learnt yesterday. This is what I had to find out today. And if you focus on that, it's usually stuff that's useful for the rest of the team to know as well. Not what I did, but what I learnt. Because sometimes you discover that you don't know things. So implications for BDD, very quickly, because we're nearly out of time. This is a boring scenario, given Fred bought a microwave. We understand how retail works, right? This is one of the things we should never, ever have done. Flipping login. I am so sorry I ever used login as an example. We know how login works. We never need to have a conversation about how login works, let alone adding two numbers together. Because, you know, that's difficult and unpredictable. 50 plus 70. I could do that when I was 6. A child can do this. This is not a good scenario to have conversations about, and I am so sorry we use this as an example. If you get into that situation, name the scenarios and be done with it, right? Create the user, read and update the user details, delete the user, and then you can ask, is there anything different about that scenario? Is there anything different about creating, updating, and deleting a user? And if you're Blizzard, you go, yeah, don't delete the user, just mark them as deleted and then email them every 3 months saying, come back to World of Warcraft, we still have all your characters. And you go, no, I'm 4 years clean, I have a life. I never want to hear this again. We cannot accept this into our backlog without clear acceptance criteria, without the scenarios defined. Every time you do this, you are pushing back on the uncertainty. The only time I hear arguments, and I know those arguments shouldn't be happening, is when it's two devs arguing about how to solve a problem that they understand really well. Honestly, if you're in that complicated space, they're both probably good. Pick the one that's easiest to change, because then if it's wrong, you can change it more easily. Find the examples you can't find. That's how to do BDD, and that's how to do it well. And don't let your process, whatever it is, Scrum, estimates, velocity, hide what you're ignorant about. BDD is about writing software that matters, and I hope I've now shown you how to do that. Thank you very much.